join us for our upcoming fundraiser, A Feast for the Senses, at Ardmore Music Hall on September 29th to help HRN expand our table and provide even more resources to the next generation of food storytellers. This is going to be an unforgettable night of flavors, crafted by Best of Philly chefs Randy Rucker and Eli Collins, with sounds curated by Philly-based Spaga featuring Aaron Magner, and conversations inspired by Delicious City Philly host Eli Culp. You can find tickets at heritageradionetwork.org/feast. And if you can't make it to our fundraiser, please consider donating to support our education programs at heritageradionetwork.org/donate.
Today's program is brought to you by Korin, a supplier of Japanese chef knives and restaurant supplies. Korin is proud of their Japanese culture and traditions, but they want you to know that their products are not just for Japanese restaurants. Their knives and tableware bring out the best qualities of food from every culture and fit into every restaurant from French to Pan-Asian to American. And that is why they're located in New York City, where people from every country in the world come to eat. Korin's Tribeca showroom is home to the most extensive collection of Japanese chef knives in the world, including Japan. Stop by to view their exquisitely designed tableware and the rarest natural sharpening stones. They have a whole range of knife services from repair and rust removal to reshaping and realigning. Korin is dedicated to this ideal, bringing the highest quality Japanese design to your table so you can experience the unparalleled quality of Japanese craftsmanship in your home or restaurant. For more information, visit Korin.com.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
So you don't charm the devil with your rock and roll load. Knows that country music's gonna save your soul. The devil runs his groove in them rhythm and blues that sound. It's gonna get you sun in the end.
Welcome back to The Speakeasy. I'm Damon Boelte. Sother, Teague, and Greg Benson, those guys, they are either recovering from Tales of the Cocktail, or they're stuck in New Orleans based on all the craziness with the air traffic over the past week or so. I got stuck myself. I was at a work event in Atlanta, Georgia, had an awesome time. Really, really cool city. I feel like I only go to Atlanta about once every 10 years. And obviously that's 10 years too long because a city can change in 10 days, So I want to say special thanks to the team over at the Ticarnagoa Club. What a great bar. You would never know it was in that area, but really, really just wonderful hospitality, very Southern hospitality, if you will. Had some great drinks, some really incredible natural wine, and it's kind of like an oxidative sherry thing. I took pictures of it because that's one thing I will tell you. When you go on a work trip and you're going around and you're on suggestions from your friends and colleagues, it can become kind of a whirlwind. So make sure you take pictures of menus, especially special menus, because those change on the regular. If it's an activation kind of event, like we do at Grand Army with our Martini Mondays, that changes every week. So it's a good thing to take pictures because there might be something you want to go back and try to recreate as a cocktail, or one of those wines that you just there's just too much wine out there. You're never going to be able to remember all of them. So take pictures. It's important. And of course, the team and I got some pictures together, and that was really fun too. I did get stuck, however, on my way back. It was a couple of Fridays ago. I was connecting through Dallas. I normally don't do connecting flights, but this was booked kind of last minute, and it's kind of all that I had. But I got stuck in Dallas for the night, and I hadn't honestly hung out in Dallas in a long time either, and I went to a great hotel with a bar in the basement called Bourbon and Banter, and got to meet the team and kind of, just again, like the very Southern hospitality. They kind of showed me around the back of the house, and it was just a really great experience. And, we obviously took some photos together. So, can really remember those things. But, I know that a lot of people who were at Tales of the Cocktail last week got stuck, or their flights were canceled. There was so much stuff with, I guess it was a software issue with flight control. So at least That's all it was. If you get stuck staying in New Orleans for another night, which I have before coming back from Tales, and you know what? It's not a bad place to get stuck. It happened to be a Sunday that I was heading back, and you know, Sunday's the day at Bacchanal where you go and do rosé all day. So I was actually happy to have my flight delayed by a full 24 hours. But speaking of, just spending some time in New Orleans and sometimes a little bit of time, we have our dear friend of the show, friend of mine, professionally and personally, back there in Brooklyn, New York. We've got Alan Katz on the show, powerhouse of a man in the booze industry and just a great overall guy. So, Alan, welcome back to the show. And you said you did go to Tales for a short stint this year.
No flight delays. I think we were delayed 15 minutes. I don't think it had anything to do with Delta, just a little weather issue. So I was easy in the big
time
easy.
For one last airport Sazerac.
Yep, in and out. It was a good time.
That's
though.
great.
It's great to be back in New Orleans, most of all.
Yeah, it's great to have, just in general, these events back, things like Bar Climate Brooklyn and Tales of the Cocktail and all the other cocktail weeks in different cities, just being able to go anywhere. The past few years have been kind of turbulent, if you will, speaking of flights. So it's just cool. I heard that from Sother and Greg, because they were both there. I skipped this year because I was in Atlanta, and I heard that it was kind of cold there this year.
Cold for New Orleans in July. I would call it comfortable. That's a great assessment. It was as comfortable a temperature as I've experienced in New Orleans in July. And I tend to walk around in a light jacket even, and it was as comfortable as can be. Middle of the day, 2:00, popping from bar to bar. It was a pleasure. No issues, taking a good long walk, a little water in hand to rehydrate. But it was great, and it added to the experience because you could sort of keep your focus, your attention span, and not worry about, what the next change of clothes might be.
Right, exactly. Yeah, my rules are every time, always have water with you and drink it. Every time you see water, drink it, unless it's in the pool at the Monteleone. And then, never finish a cocktail at an activation because, they're free, and a lot of newer, younger bartenders that go there, and it's just big party time, But really, you got to keep your wits about you. It still is New Orleans, and the other one's schedule time for sleep. I always tell this story. I was walking with some of those kind of newer bartenders one year at Tales Cocktail, and it was about late lunchtime, and walking down the sidewalk, Dave Wondrich is coming my way. And he's like, "Hey, Damon, let's go get a drink at Aaron Rose later." And I'm like, yeah, sure. What time? And he's like, I don't know, about 5:30. I was like, yeah, sounds good. And we keep walking, and the bartenders I was walking with, they're kind of giggling. They're like, that was Dave Wondrich. But what do you think he meant? Do you think he meant AM or PM? And I was like, I'm pretty sure he meant AM. I turned around like, Dave, you meant 5:30 AM, right? He's like, yeah. I'm like, yeah. And they were just their jaws were dropped. It was pretty funny. But it's to me, I will say this to people who go to Tales of the Cocktail: go back to New Orleans when it's not Tales. Yeah,
absolutely, and many times over.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the most. I think it's the most unique city in the United States for sure, by far. But it's definitely the most spiritual.
I say the same thing. It is the most, I would say, distinctively unique. To add just a little further characterization by food, by art. Certainly for me, it's a wonderful city for photography. Great galleries, and
absolutely.
Tales, for all of its attributes, for the most part, confines you to the French Quarter, and even a small part of that. So to be able to go uptown for dinner or to the Garden District during the day, it's essential to really have a sense of as much of the city as you can.
Totally. I usually try to make sure that, that I at least know someone or have one myself, a rental car. And I try to block off half of a day at least just to go do non-tail stuff. Even go to there was a couple of years where some of us would go and get a fan boat and go out fishing and stuff. And it was a blast, I mean, of course, we
I
did
usually
have
keep the
some class.
evenings free to exactly right to catch up with friends, people from other cities, other countries. Life's too short at this point,
Yeah,
and the memories are great, but to be able to catch up with people on a more personal basis when you're not walking down the street or waving to someone across the sidewalk is a special moment for me.
yeah, absolutely. So, what were you doing at Tails? Were you promoting some of the new developments with New York Distilling Company?
I was. We had our new brands down, Jaywalk Rye specifically, and to be honest, it was unbeknownst to me until I got back to Brooklyn that we won a great award, one of the best new rye whiskey categories in the, I
Yeah,
guess now not so nascent New Orleans spirits competition that's associated with Tales of the Cocktail. So certainly exciting, to get people's opinions, get people just to taste it and know that it exists from a broader spectrum of the bubble that I work and live in Brooklyn specifically, but in broader metro New York area, is always a great opportunity. And I had not been to Tales in several years, frankly, not since before COVID. So just to experience it a little bit, I was there for 2.5 days. That's all. But to catch up with friends, with industry friends, talk a little bit about business, but also personal recaps as well, was invigorating. It was lively just to hear people's one enthusiasm, two always challenges, and we're in a challenging marketplace and political climate and social climate, and it more than seeps into things that we do every day as part of our business. And it was great to just catch up with people and compare New York to London or Edinburgh or New York to San Francisco or Chicago or Austin, Texas is best in person. And it was great to just be able to experience that sometimes over a cocktail, sometimes not, just over a po' boy or some broiled oysters and just laugh a little bit because I think we all need more of that anyway. Was a lot of
absolutely.
fun.
Yeah. So that being said, I mean, you've been very busy in these last few years since the last time you went to Tails. You're in a new facility, New York Distilling Company is, and I can see behind you some familiar mechanicals. You got your
Yeah.
still back there, which is a pot still with looks like you've got just from the small thumbnail screen that I can see, you've got your column off to the side, rectifier.
Yeah, it's a related column.
Yeah.
But
Very
what's
cool.
unique in our new space, we moved from Williamsburg, our original home of a dozen years, over to Bushwick. And I'm a terrible judge of size, to be honest, but I know that it's 15,000 square feet. It allows us, once again, to dream a little bit and plan a little bit broader as to how we might utilize the space, even more so in the future. And from a production side, obviously behind me, as you can see, the idea is that we have the space to add column for further whiskey distillation. In the back of the house, behind the bar here to my left, there's room for additional fermenters. And so we're back up and running, which is great in and of itself. But the concept and opportunity to think about the future is, for me, what's most exciting about the space. Why we moved is a whole nother story, but here we are, and it's great to daydream about the possibilities.
Yeah. And, 15,000 square feet, that's like, you chop off 1 0 and you're very fortunate to have that space in New York. Chop off an extra 150 square feet is like probably most people's apartment, so like you've got plenty of room for growth and you've grown. So when did you start the move from the original Williamsburg spot? Or was it Greenpoint?
We knew it was in William, right on the cusp, actually.
Yeah.
Quick anecdote is that we had 2 exits, one through the bar, through the shanty. That was a Williamsburg address.
Oh,
the
yeah.
entrance and exit through the distillery was Greenpoint.
Right. I remember that.
So we were right on the cusp. What really predicated the move was threefold. One was, the truth is that our lease was expiring at year 13. And so, we had to prep for that. Our landlord, who we had a fine relationship with, at this point was more interested in the profitability, like so many stories, of a small apartment building on the footprint of the old distillery, which had basically been a little bit of a corrugated warehouse for decades. In truth, I'm not sure it was on the buildings department maps when we took a lease on it. But nevertheless, and we
But
acknowledged it.
you had the fire department next door, so I'm sure they kind of
We
like
did. They were great neighbors. They were great.
they probably had something to do with
firefighters.
Yeah.
Well, maybe. I mean,
I don't know.
it was just a storage warehouse, and we turned it into a functioning distillery and bar at a time when the idea of quote unquote craft distilling combined with urban distilling was really a brand new concept. Going back to the mid 2000s, we opened in 2011 ultimately, but the lease was ending, and that seemed like it was written in stone. Accepted it matter of factly, but the others were interesting. One, progressively, we needed more space, and we were excited about that. Hey, where can we move to in the right zoning that could accommodate for more production, maybe a bigger front of the house opportunity? But the real push was that over the course of about 5 years, the FDNY, not the uniform FDNY, but the jacket and tie fire officials had been working on, with our participation in other distilleries in New York City, new regulations to accommodate and allow for safe urban distilling in New York City. And a lot of them really changed and are changing how we have to plan our functional production business to actually operate in New York City. And it really reduced the capacities that we could keep on hand at any given time of whiskey and production and even finished goods. And it's somewhat of a simplification, but that's really what predicated us finding a new, what was an empty warehouse space, and designing it so we could maximize our production and still be an urban distillery in New York City.
Wow. I mean, I often wonder with, it's the same with the Department of Health and, with like bars and restaurants, they're constantly changing the rules on you, and you've got to comply. And sometimes things are grandfathered in. I mean, there
are some funny stories, but I really want to stress, and I mean it sincerely, I agree, our company agrees with 95% of the new regulations. It really is about safety. Lots of things you can imagine, eyes open or shut, of what can go wrong, what kind of accidents can take place, and bluntly, what kind of fires can be started in an operation like this. And you can't turn away or shy away from those things. And that's really what the opportunity was, to look at with the fire department's direction of how to keep things as safe as possible from a boiler standpoint, from not just storing alcohol, but producing it under high pressure. And so, there are only one or two things I'd say, hey, well, maybe could we get a break on finished goods? That would be an example. And technically that applies to the amount of alcohol we can keep on hand. But again, we're all for safety, and what the fire department devised, one, not only makes good sense, but I would hasten to expect that within the next 5 years, maybe 10, it'll be a standardized set of codified rules and regulations for urban distilling, at the very least, across the country.
Were there any of those things that you were already doing that they decided that were kind of a standardized rule? Were you kind of ahead of a lot of it?
Yeah, we were not ahead because, the truth is, and you had been to our original space, but for those who may not have been, it was essentially a one-room schoolhouse. From a production standpoint, the distillery was in the same room as bottling, storage, and not just storage of alcohol, but storage of packaging materials. Very honestly, cardboard, some elements of cork tops, glass. And so in a sophisticated way, in a common sense way, it doesn't make sense for all those things to be in the same room. So we needed a space where we could dissect and create different rooms that would accommodate for these different elements and keep them segregated, just out of common sense.
Yeah, makes sense. So that said, as far as packaging goes, and we'll get to, I want to talk about Jaywalk, but I think this is kind of an interesting segue. I've always been interested in, I come from a background of graphic design. So like, I'm always interested when I see someone's packaging change. And you've somewhat recently, kind of overhauled all the packaging. Was that something where you just kind of like, you realized like, okay, we started out with, basically generic glass for some of them, and you were just like, at some certain point of growth, you're like, it's time to level up, or was it something?
The key word is growth. You've got to have, you have to have the desire, but you really have to have the growth opportunity and an outlook for further growth to say this is going to impact the brand. And I'd be very honest, what we've said consistently in our history is we believe with great humility that we make really good products, not only the rye whiskey, but the gins as well. What we have lacked in our history, though, is real high quality branding and marketing. And so as the opportunity presented itself, not just financially, but in the story of the grain that really is what Jaywalk is comprised of, that no one had tasted yet. We thought, now this is another opportunity. If we can really put the materials together, put the financial aspect together to really create something a little bit broader, a little bit more about attitude than some specific noun like Ragtime, which was our previous brand, and say this is something that will translate to markets across the country, and we hope internationally as well in the future. And that's how the route to Jaywalk began.
And so just for the listeners too, I mean, Jaywalk's been around for a little while, but what we're talking about specifically, the new product is the 13-year rye. Is that correct?
Well, no, the project has been 13 years in the making, but Jaywalk is the new brand that we've been working on for that period of time. Yeah, the short version is, we were always looking to make as authentically and uniquely New York whiskey as possible. And we just didn't let the cat out of the bag because we didn't know what the results would be. But the truth is, before we even incorporated the business, going back to 2009, 2010, we were looking into historical records. And fortunately, we were connected with the Seed Savers group at the College of Agriculture at Cornell University, which is up in Ithaca in upstate New York. And their sole focus is on propagating and researching seeds of agricultural variety that have essentially been lost and forgotten. And we asked them directly, could they research if there were any varieties of rye truly, authentically native to New York? And to make a long story short, they found a few. And with our farmer up in Seneca Falls, we did tests on all of them, and one passed muster. And it's a variety whose origins go back to late 17th century Rye, New York. And the variety is called Horton. There's still a Horton Street in Rye, New York, perpendicular to the beach at Rye Playland. And this was a family that came here. They were clearly farmers, makes sense in the 1600s. And they must have been a large and I believe religious family because they had no fewer than 7 farms from Rye all the way out to Orient Point, which is the very tip, the very end of Long Island. And this was their family hybrid that they created when they settled here. And so we got 10. Yeah. If I can curse with you, we got 10 motherfucking seeds, a little dime bags worth of Horton Rye. And it started in a pot, like stereotypically on a windowsill, and then a few pots in a greenhouse, and then a more expanded greenhouse test, and then a field test. And it took 5 years from those 10 seeds just to have enough to start distilling, a dozen barrels. And at this point, now 14 years later, we have about 250 acres of this one variety of rye in perpetual crop rotation. And we have several thousand barrels of aging important variety rye whiskey. And that's what the Jaywalk brand is created around, this new but very old variety of rye that, as I like to say, no living lips have really tasted.
Dang, that's
Dang is right.
motherfucking crazy.
Yeah, that's crazy. I call it reverse, Damon.
Yeah, it pretty much is. Well, I mean, if anyone was going to do it, it was going to be you, you know. And but that's just so funny. I mean, how serendipitous is it that the town was called Rye, or is called Rye, you know? And so I think that's kind of an interesting thing too. It's like just understanding the New York whiskey history. I think that a lot of people, if they're not from New York, they think of like New York as New York City. They don't really think of like the agricultural aspects of it, you know, where it's like, yeah, sure, we drink old fashions and Manhattans. So yeah, you would think of like whiskey cocktails when you think New York, but you don't really think about whiskey production because, I mean, truth be told, it didn't exist for a very long time. In upstate, and like there were certain people who started getting that going, you know, the Arenzos and whatnot, and so it's just, but it's so cool to see.
Well, that's all pretty recent, obviously. You know,
I know, yeah, absolutely.
But centuries ago, I mean, you got to think of it in the context of wherever there was agriculture, there was at the very least an interest in distilling because it was a means of preservation, of creating a commodity before your grain or your fruit would go bad.
Yeah. I mean, you're making beer, and then that's one way to preserve it. And then you're like, wait a minute.
And for us, being in New York is interesting. Obviously, we're a New York City brand, but the truth is that upstate New York, whether it's the Hudson Valley, and I believe even more so up in the Finger Lakes. And again, just for context, if someone's not familiar with it on a map, you're really closer to Canada than you are to New York City or further south of Philadelphia or even Washington, D.C. I mean, to drive to where our grain is being grown from the distillery, if I didn't stop and left right now, would take 6 hours.
To get out
so it's really further distant north. And it's not just the agronomy, the soil composition, and the related elements from an environmental standpoint, but the temperatures are specifically great for growing rye, because rye is a grain that's very hardy, but its real growth spurt is under snowpack during the winter. We call it winter rye. It's usually planted after a first or early frost. You can think of it in a Thanksgiving time of year, but as it starts to snow, December, January, February, even into March, that's where the root is really taking place and growing. And once that snow melts, of course, that's water that's further feeding the rye itself. In this case, that's when the growth spurt starts to, typically early to mid-July harvest.
Yeah, and I think to kind of like step aside from grain, I mean, even grapes in New York, I mean, it's incredible. Like New York wines are pretty amazing. And if you look at the map, I mean, we're right across. It's literally we're talking about like southern France, Spain, Italy, Greece. I mean, some of the best wine in the world is coming from those regions. So just thinking about the latitude itself, it's pretty insane. Like when you think about
global warming is certainly having an effect, obviously, on agriculture. Sure. Grapes more so. It'll be interesting to see, 50 years, 100 years. As I said, rye uniquely is very hardy. I think its attributes that are worth mentioning is it really aids in reducing soil erosion. And for decades, if not generations, as you alluded to, farmers would plant rye for those attributes, not because they were harvesting it for whiskey or for bread or for feed. They planted it because it tamps down on soil erosion, it adds nutrients to the grain, and they would just plow it under. So imagine, even at our size, going to a farmer and say, what if I bought all your rye instead of you plowing it under? So win-win. Right. They get all the components, the nutrients for the soil, the reduction of soil erosion, but they get to harvest it. And as a byproduct, obviously, we're interested in the seeds themselves at the head of the grain.
It's amazing. I love talking about this because, like, my farm in Oklahoma, we've always grown wheat and rye, and I talking with my dad about it, like, kind of, after he retired several years ago, kind of like understanding, like, because he was our county commissioner, but everyone who lives in the country farms. It doesn't matter if you're a lawyer, a dentist, or whatever it is. Like, you still farm where I'm from in Oklahoma. And like the Oklahoma-Texas border, and it's a thing. And like, just kind of understanding why he was planting, why he has planted what he has, and kind of like the crop turnover, and just like, obviously we're using the wheat and using the rye. But it's interesting to talk about that, because I hadn't thought about that in a while, about like the soil kind of regeneration and just like preservation of the soil.
It's vital.
Really.
It's so impactful.
And then obviously you can use a little less water, not much less water, but a little less water. That's cool. All right. So let's talk about the whiskey itself. So now 13 years, that's, some other whiskeys, very notable whiskeys, come to mind at that age statement. Your Van Winkle.
And I want to be clear, it's 13 years from getting the 10 seeds. The oldest whiskeys that we have of this variety are now coming on 8 years old. So again, it was 4 or 5 years of just planting and replanting. And then we were able to start distilling it. And I would say it was even another 2 or 3 years in before we were able to, in my words, put some markers against the unique characteristics of this whiskey based on the sugars in the grains themselves, and being able to compare it to other varieties of rye that we had distilled in our history.
Gotcha. What are some of those flavor points?
So uniquely for me, and I'll give you one description, that Horton Rye, by size, is about a third of the length of conventional rye. And that's not to say in any way that conventional rye makes inferior whiskey. It makes lovely whiskey. It's just a different point of view for us of this rather short head of the grain. So you've got fewer seeds, and the sugars in the rye are concentrated in that smaller number of seeds. So for us, very uniquely, and unlike tasting notes, if you will, that I've attributed to any other rye whiskey I've had, domestic or otherwise, is a sense of tropical flavors. It's a different caramelization of the sugars, and notes of apricot, candied mango, bruleed pineapple. And those are not the notes that are going to hit you in the face, but they're the real interesting undertones and flavors that come to the fore when I'm mixing with it, or when I'm adding a little bit of water ice. And it's a different context of sweetness. And one of our abject purposes, I am certain, in making rye whiskey is to belie the assumption that I believe comes from marketing, that rye whiskey equals spice. There's so much more to it, I believe, than just that connotation of, oh, you must like spicy whiskey, you drink rye. And for us, there's such a range of flavors, and specifically fruit and sugar flavors, that add to the depth of flavor, the aroma, of course, but really the range of flavors, if you're talking about a Manhattan, that really, over the course of it coming to temperature, evolves substantially in the glass.
What comes to mind immediately as you're describing that, it's like the common misconception with mezcal being smoky, where, if you're getting like a real like heirloom mezcal, it's like, I've had some that just taste like straight up pineapple, and that's such a departure from what a lot of people are used to, or what their availability is in their local store or through distribution. So I'm really intrigued by this, right? And yes, of course, you think about your Manhattans and old fashions when you say rye whiskey, but my mind's going off into uncharted territory. Like, I'm thinking about what's in my juice well, and in my like liqueur modifiers,
sure,
rather outside of just your vermouth. I'm even thinking like Blanc vermouth versus Italian vermouth. It's like, or
Spanish vermouth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, straight across the pond from Spain with New York. So
Couldn't agree more.
that's cool.
And that's the fun of it, of course.
Yeah. So speaking of, okay, so let's go back to the facility for a little bit here. Right now you have the tasting room kind of bar set up there. So what's going to be different here for the listeners out there who had been to the bar that was called the Shanty, that was part of the original distillery, it's a full bar. And, really, when you're talking with somebody like Alan Katz here, someone who's like been in the industry for a long time, who's extremely well traveled, and of course, like when we travel the world, we bring back some nice bottles, to put on our back bar. The Shanty had just an amazing collection, of just amazing spirits, and I always thought that was really cool. But at the same time, I'm like, I felt like sometimes people were in there just for the bar, and I was like, but look behind you, there's a whole distillery, because the bar was like when you're sitting at the bar, you were facing the opposite wall, but you had to like turn around and look behind you through the windows. So I've seen a lot of modern distilleries where they have their tasting bars and then the windows and then the stills behind them, and it looks like, from what I can tell, that's kind of what the new New York Distilling Company is.
It is. This is a much bigger space. Now that we're out of that space, we probably jammed 50 people into that space at any given time at the Shanty. Our public capacity here in our new location is 370. So it's designed, in addition to having the space and a kitchen opportunity, to not just be a public space, which we hope it'll be in the future, but also to host events. And actually this month we start public tours again, which we're really excited to not only share our new space, our new home, but also be able to share the new whiskey as well.
That's amazing. All that timing coming together. It's great. Also, just my mind goes here because I recently got married about a year ago, and
Right.
I just looking for like event spaces for weddings. I'm like, fuck, man, if we were in New York and the timing was right, I would have requested to be married in your spot.
We had
370
one wedding
people.
at the old space. Yeah. You could have a good party here. That's for sure.
Yeah. Amazing. But yeah, go back to the tasting bar. Right now, you were telling me before the show that, of course, right now it's all New York Distilling products, or at least mostly focused there. But you're planning on building out a fuller bar at some point.
That's the ultimate goal, is to get back to the public bar space. We are licensed to do that. So, and we love running a bar because you're then able to really interact, not just with locals or New Yorkers, but this is the neighborhood we're in Bushwick. It's too cool for me. It's sort of the last vestige, I think, of real coolness in Brooklyn. It's a destination internationally for things like graffiti art. There are even bus tours in the neighborhood focused on graffiti art, great music clubs, other venues. It'll be really interesting over the next decade plus to see how housing evolves in Bushwick as well.
Great radio stations.
Great radio station over there at the Heritage Radio Network.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly right, over at Roberta's. Roberta's, by foot, is about a 10-minute walk from here, just to give you context. So easier to get to than when we were even in Williamsburg, although, there's an L train stop 2-minute walk away at the Jefferson Street. But we're excited to be here because, again, as I said, creatively, it's infusing us with a whole new set of possibilities, and having that room for creativity is what you thrive on.
Oh, one thing that I remember going to a lot at the old distillery was, going and seeing bluegrass or seeing like the National Reserve, like a lot of live music. Is that part of the plan for?
That is absolutely part of the plan. Where
Cool.
Every detail, as I was saying to you before we started recording, is we're open, we're distilling, we're about to bring public tours back in. But we're still fine-tuning, it feels like, details on a daily basis. And that's just the way it goes, I think, in a new home, in a new space. And so we'll look to add that in the near term as well.
Very cool. And for the listeners out there too, I think what made the original New York Distilling Company with the shanty interesting, apart from a lot, like when you go to the Bourbon Trail, for instance, in Kentucky, you have the distillery and you'll have the tasting room, and that's kind of where it ends. The cool thing about New York Distilling Company and having the bar is that, when the tours end, a lot of distilleries, they're done for the day.
Right.
But I remember, because we've been friends for so long, I never got a daytime tour. It was always when I went there at night to hang out.
Right, of course.
And, and then you were like, okay, it's time for a private tour.
Right.
So that's how I remember.
Time to crack the barrels, Damon.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's cool, man. Like, it's unique to a lot of other distilleries that I've ever been to. And I can't believe 370 people capacity. That's just insane. Like, that's a lot.
I might keep it at 250 for a while, but that is the legal capacity.
Yeah.
You got to put it through its paces. And most of all, as you know, as well as anyone that I know, you've got to make sure you can serve those people as well. So totally. Even though we have a legal capacity, we have to make sure that we really can serve the people, keep it straightforward and clean, and all the aspects that are behind the scenes from a business standpoint.
Just because you can doesn't mean you have to. I mean,
exactly right.
Like Grand Army, we have a 4:00 liquor license, so we can be open till 4 a.m.
Right.
We're never open past 2. Yeah. So it's one of those things. But yeah, I can't even. 370 is already a scary number to me. 250 is still a scary number to me, service wise. So I think keeping it there is pretty good. So this is awesome. I'm kind of glad that Sother and Greg got stuck in New Orleans or they're hungover or whatever it is, because just on a personal level, I've always just loved talking shop with you, and it's great to catch up and kind of, just really kind of get into this update, this huge update from you.
There you go.
With New York Distilling Company, with what you've got going on there and all the amazing stuff and the growth. And just like hearing about that seed bank story, God, that's so cool. And
we love this story. We absolutely do. But I'll be honest, and I say it to everyone I talk to, everyone I taste with, the story is phenomenal. It doesn't mean that the whiskey is good at all. So to me, the paramount follow-up is taste the whiskey. And then it's an attribute to everyone that we work with here, from choosing specific barrels, working on specific blends. There's a real wonderful range of skill sets that really go on behind the scenes, and a lot of people involved with a lot of dedication to making sure that we check all the boxes before any Jaywalk goes out into the public.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can't wait to get a bottle of this and try it out. And not so traditional late 19th century cocktails, but something a little bit more modern that kind of plays off the flavor profiles that you were talking about. So really cool. Alan, thanks so much for being on the show today. It's been fun catching up on New York Distilling Company. So for people who are out there listening and want to learn more, the website is nydistilling.com.
It is, but if you really want to learn about Jaywalk, go to jaywalkrye.com. Brand new website. Okay, cool. Actually also putting the finishing touches on, but you can go there and learn all about the story of how we brought these 10 seeds from the past into a modern American New York, if you will, rye whiskey.
Jaywalk Rye. I'm looking at it right now. Oh, cool. I'm going to tap into this a little bit further. Got a great, just looks like we're looking down Broadway in Soho. I still got it. It's been a few years since I've lived there full time, but I remember I got my landmarkers. I know where things are. But speaking of where things are, what is the address? I mean, I'm sure they can find it obviously on the website, but just while they're listening to the show.
Yeah, we're at 573 Johnson Avenue. It's at the corner of Gardner Avenue in the heart of Bushwick.
Great. And again, for those people who are listening, Bushwick has been, this amazing neighborhood that is kind of like, it was very industrial. So to me, I feel like it was just kind of primed for a lot of these great bars and restaurants, places like Roberta's that could expand and pretty much take over the entire city block, which is where Heritage Radio Network is. That's where our station is, at least the live station. The offices are on the same block, just down the road. And it's just a cool area. If you're visiting New York City, definitely, you can't really know New York City unless you go to Brooklyn. And like understanding Brooklyn is nowadays really getting to Bushwick. And like you said before, there's a lot of spirit there and a lot of energy and activity. And it's a lot of art. It's like, it really kind of encapsulates a lot of what the spirit of Brooklyn is these days.
Yeah. So, amen.
And then for all that walking around, you're gonna need a cocktail. So be sure to, or at least a stiff drink. So go check out New York Distilling Company, and hopefully, if Alan's there, you can say hi to him and take a tour and try all the products. We haven't even talked. We were talking about Jaywalk, mostly on this show, but I've always been a fan of your gins. I come mostly from the gin world, and when I work in the spirit side. And so I've always been a huge fan of the Perry Stott and the Dorothy Parker. So just try the entire line. But yeah, again, that's it for the Speakeasy this week. Thank you, Alan Katz, for being on the show this week. Get better, Sother and Greg, or at least don't figure out your flight or whatever you need to do to get back to the studio. But again, it's been really great just one-on-one catching up with you, Alan. So really appreciate you being here this week.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you, Damon.
All right. Well, that's it for the Speakeasy this week. Check out Heritage Radio Network for more programs like this one. And until next week, everyone, cheers.
I'm Lou Bank.
And I'm Greg Benson.
And this is an ad for Ancestral Agave Syrup, the critically acclaimed award-winning syrup that helps gringo bartenders better make margaritas, Negronis,
Lou, hold up. Wait,
old
are you just
fashions?
This is how you start your podcast.
What?
It's not an ad for Ancestral Agave Syrup.
Well, of course it is. I'm just cutting costs by not paying writers to make something new. I'm just using an old script.
You pay writers?
Is that some kind of jab?
No, I'm just saying
What are you saying?
Well, look, we've got this amazing syrup that's made in an ancestral manner, cooked down from the sap of the agave, harvested the way these families would to make pulque. It's a quality product. It deserves a quality presentation.
Yeah, okay, hang on. Ancestral agave syrup is made by real families following traditional methods. Unlike the industrial Blue Weber syrup you get everywhere else, Ancestral is cooked down from aguamiel harvested from Salmiana in Hidalgo, Mexico. It is the grade A Vermont maple to the sticky diner syrup you've been using for your cocktails. Ingredients matter, both in how your cocktail tastes and how you treat the earth. Ancestral is better for both. Is that good?
Sure. Or maybe confusing instead of cheesy. Look, just visit ancestralagave.com to learn more and to order your world-class agave syrup today.
And we'll call that a wrap. Catch you next ad, Greg.
Hasta pronto?
Ancestral Agave Syrup. Available online at ancestralagave.org and wherever Greg and Lou are able to coerce store owners into carrying it.
So you don't charm the devil with your rock.
The Speakeasy is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food and drink radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.